Hey everybody, and welcome to Board Game Heaven. This episode I'm taking a look at a prototype of Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era by Tabula Games. And this is going to be on Kickstarter soon. I'll put a link in the description below. And this is a game that has 6 different faction decks that all play very differently. And each player chooses a faction or even deck builds their own faction. And then you have to play against each other, and each player has 4 sanctuaries that they need to defend from the other player. And the player who destroys the 4 sanctuaries of the opponent first wins the game. So let me set up a game, I'll explain the rules, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. Before I set up the game, I'll need to explain which types of cards you will find in all the faction decks. There are 4 sanctuaries, many acolytes, several rituals, and 1 champion in each deck. Acolytes are the soldiers that you summon on the battlefield to attack and defend your sanctuaries. Many of them will have attributes and abilities. Rituals are basically your spells, and each faction has 1 champion, which is basically a very powerful soldier. And your sanctuaries are basically your bases that also have special abilities, and you'll need to defend them to win the game. Sanctuaries have an Aegis track, which is basically their health, and you track that with an Aegis token. And they also have a Splendor track, which you track with a Splendor token, and once they hit their maximum, you will activate a special ability that will help you during the game. Acolytes, rituals, and champions all have a summoning cost in the top left corner, their name in the middle, and their faction symbol on the right. Acolytes and champions will also have an attack and a defense value, and many of them will have attribute icons and ability descriptions. Ritual cards only have a casting cost and an ability description and are discarded after use. To set up the game, each player takes their 4 sanctuary cards and arranges them in any order from left to right. Place the Aegis and the Splendor tokens on their respective tracks, the Aegis on the maximum value, and the Splendor always starts at 0. Some sanctuaries only have a value of 0, which means that they are immediately active. You set apart your champion card, and then all your acolyte and ritual cards are shuffled into your draw deck. The area between both player sanctuaries is considered the battlefield area. And it's a 4x4 grid where your acolytes and champions will be deployed. You may only deploy cards on your side of the battlefield, and the 4 spots in front of your sanctuaries are the defense positions, and the 4 spots in the front are your attack positions. Create a pool of essence crystals, draw 4 cards, and then you're ready to play. If you don't like your starting hand, then you may decide to put them back in the deck, shuffle it, and draw 3 new cards. You may perform this action only once. Flip a coin to see who is going to be the first player, and whoever wins may decide to go second instead. That's the entire setup. Let's explain the rules. During a game of Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era, players alternate to perform turns. And a player's turn is made up of 4 phases: the beginning of the turn phase, the summoning phase, the attack phase, and the end of the turn phase. Some phases are divided into 3 sub-phases: the beginning, the core, and the end. And some cards can refer to that by saying at the beginning of your attack phase, for example, or like this card that says at the end of your summoning phase, or sometimes even during a certain phase. At the start of each round, each player takes 2 of these essence crystals, except for the first round of the starting player. That player only gains 1 crystal, but after that each player gains 2. You resolve all the at the beginning of your turn abilities and effects, and then you go on to the next phase, which is the summoning phase. Check to see if you have any cards that say at the beginning of your summoning phase and resolve those effects. And then you may deploy units and cast rituals in any order onto your battlefield. And you do that by checking the cost on the left top side of your card and paying that many essence crystals, and then you can deploy this unit, for example. So I pay 1 of these crystals, and then I decide whether I want to place this unit in the defense or in the attack position. Whether playing a card into the defense or attack position, they always come and play exhausted. Exhausted acolytes cannot attack or defend, yet their abilities are still active. You can also cast rituals during the summoning phase by paying their cost, and rituals are resolved immediately after being cast. And after having been resolved, they go to your discard pile. After this summoning phase follows the attack phase. So let's say I already had a unit in attack position and it wasn't exhausted, then I can attack with that unit. And I do that by exhausting that unit, declaring an attack, and then it will do 3 damage to either the sanctuary if it's undefended or to the defending unit on the other side of the battlefield. So let's say the defending player had one of his acolytes on the other side of the battlefield. Let's say, for example, it was this one, and I will place it face up so it's easier to read. Then my attacking unit would be blocked by this defending unit, and then you exchange damage, and this unit would deal 3 damage to that one, destroying it, and this unit would deal 2 damage to this one, but that has a health of 3, so it can withstand that damage. Just takes 2 damage until the end of turn, and then all damage is just removed. Damage between units is always dealt simultaneously. So then any destroyed units get removed from the game, and possible effects that trigger after that happens get resolved, and then it gets placed into the discard pile. If the opponent did not have a unit in defense position, then my damage would go directly to the sanctuary, and my opponent would have to move their Aegis counter down as many points as I have dealt it damage. And as soon as that counter hits 0, you flip the card around, indicating that that sanctuary has been destroyed. And after the attack phase comes the end of the turn phase, and all partial damage on units is reset, all your units become active again, all your sanctuaries advance their splendor counter by 1, you resolve all the at the end of your turn abilities and effects in any order. You may choose and discard any number of cards and then draw cards from your deck back up to your hand size, which is normally 4 but can be enhanced. If a sanctuary has been destroyed, it stays in its lane face down, and attacking players can still attack those sanctuaries. And when a destroyed sanctuary is attacked, the defending player removes from the game face down the first card of their deck. So you put it back into the box instead of the discard pile. If a player cannot draw any more cards from their draw deck, you must choose one of your sanctuaries to be destroyed. Aside from an attack and a health value, many of your cards will also have attributes. Common attributes have a circular icon, and the orange fists icon means zealous, and that means that this acolyte is deployed active, or in this case this champion, which means they are not exhausted when entering play and they can attack or defend immediately. The red fierce icon means that that card can only be deployed on attack position. The veil attribute means that that card cannot be targeted by enemy rituals or abilities from either other units or sanctuaries. The purple Reaper attribute means that if this acolyte damages another unit by any means, then that unit is automatically destroyed. Special attributes have an octagonal shape, and this blue ongoing attribute means that this ability is resolved anytime its requirements are met. You simply follow the card's ability description for details. In this example, the card has an ability that triggers whenever they have units on its flanks. And flanks are cards in the closest slots to their left and right. Some cards have an ongoing passive ability that has no requirements, but in this case triggers at a certain time, so at the end of the turn. The green Genesis special attribute means that this ability is resolved the moment the unit is deployed. So whenever I put this card into play, I activate this ability. The black last word special attribute is very similar, only that ability is resolved the moment that unit is destroyed. So in this example, this card both triggers this ability when it comes into play and when it's destroyed. Now during a game, it may happen that 2 effects or abilities are triggered at the same time. And when this happens, the current player decides the order in which the abilities are resolved. Whenever an acolyte is destroyed, it is moved to the discard pile. But whenever a champion has to leave the battlefield, it is permanently destroyed and is placed back in its champion spot face down. It is then permanently removed for the remainder of the game. If you want to deploy a unit on the same position as another card of yours, first you must destroy that card and trigger any of its abilities, thus replacing that card. Trigger any abilities that might happen, and you put that card into play exhausted unless it has the Zealous attribute. And that is basically all you need to know on how to play Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era. Let's go to my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on Sanctuary, the Keeper's Era by Tabula Games. Now bear in mind that this is a prototype, so the final components will be different. The rules weren't completely final, and these tuck boxes will have a slightly different size in the final version as well. But from what I've seen, I really like what I have seen. So let me just start with talking about the presentation. So the components are very good. The cards are already of a very nice and thick quality, so if this is an indication of what the final version will look like, then the card quality is absolutely good. The colors are very vibrant and they pop. The print is good. I also like these power crystals. Those are a nice touch as well, and you'll get those. It's just the tokens were very small. You get several little bags of tokens. And these were, of course, just paper prototypes, but the final version will be cardboard, so at least it will be thicker and hopefully also double-sided. But still, I find them to be very fiddly. You're supposed to put, tokens on your sanctuaries to keep track of their splendor and of their health. But they're very small, and I think even if they were cardboard, they'd be easier to handle, but still very small, and they could easily drop off the table and you could lose them. But there is a Kickstarter edition box, kind of a collector's box, that holds all 6 of the faction decks into one bigger box, and that will have wooden components. So you'll still have these crystals, but you will have, instead of these cardboard small tokens, you'll have wooden cubes to keep track of the sanctuary's health and some other parts for splendor. So I don't know how they're going to do that with these heart tokens and these attribute tokens, but at least I feel that will be better than just tiny cardboard tokens. Furthermore, that box will also have a compartment underneath with 2 play mats, so that's pretty cool. Each player will have a play mat with unique art on it, so that's also nice. So you can put your cards on that, and that's just a nice added extra. And the deluxe storage box will also have player reference cards with all the attributes explained on them and the turn order and all the phases that are in a player's turn. So that's also a pretty good thing. Now the artwork on the cards is also absolutely gorgeous. It's very colorful, very vibrant, really like them. And each faction is different and they're built around a different strategy, which I will talk about in a bit. But they have different kinds of creatures, different kinds of spells. And so all of their art is kind of based on that. It has a very consistent style. You basically recognize which faction it is by looking at the art. So for example, you have the Thanon, which are a dragonkin or a birdkin creatures, and they have wings and they fly, and they got blue cards and a blue logo. And yeah, that's pretty cool. So all their sanctuaries, are mostly blue. And you have these lion folk, the Molran, and they have an orange logo and orange backs on the cards. And they have kind of like anthropomorphic creatures, lots of lion folk, some panda bear folk even, and a rhinoceros, all kinds of things. And it looks like, like a bit of African themed creatures, so that's very nice as well. There's a deck that uses kind of like necromancy and sacrifices, and they're a sickly green. And there's a purple deck with manipulation and mind control. So it's all very thematic and very consistent, and I like that a lot. Very, very colorful artwork. and each of these factions also play very differently, which brings me to the gameplay, because each of these factions is designed around a different strategy. There's the Molran, for example. I've found want you to just make full-on attacks. They have lots of fierce warriors and very, brave lion folk that just go on and attack, and you want to quickly attack, and it doesn't matter if you lose units, you'll just play new ones. And then the Thanon, the winged creatures, they are very agile and they can move around. So once you've played a creature somewhere, you can move them somewhere else, or then just surprise your opponent by putting them in the defense or in the offense all of a sudden. So that's pretty cool as well. And once you've played a round with, or a game with one of these factions, you will have figured out what that strategy is. I found it to be very intuitive. You'll have to read the cards once and look at what your sanctuaries do, because that's a major part of the game, of course, and they give you bonuses that really help that strategy. So I've played all of them at least once, and I found that after one game, it kind of clicks, and you want to play again and see if you can optimize your turns to utilize those strategies. So that's pretty cool, I think. And that kind of reminded me of Magic the Gathering, where you have the 5 colors of Magic, and each color of Magic has also a certain strategy. But this is more straightforward and well, I wouldn't say simplified, but it's more streamlined, because in Magic you have thousands of cards in each color and you'll have to build your own deck. But this comes with pre-constructed decks and that are already built and like optimized, streamlined around that strategy. And all factions also feel quite balanced. There's certain combos that you can play that feel really strong, but each deck has that, so it kind of balances out that way. And I really enjoyed figuring that out and playing a faction against another faction, and then figuring out, okay, so with my faction I could do this, and the opponent can do that, so let me try again. If you lost, next time you'll try something else. Or maybe you want to try a different faction and see how that goes, because all these strategies are different, you're gonna find that sometimes against a specific faction you might win more easily with this faction or more difficultly with that faction, depending on how well you play. And but all in all, I found it to be pretty well balanced. All the games that I played after a couple of testing plays were really tight and really came down to the last couple of rounds where I would have won had my opponent not just beat me in that final turn, So if they hadn't destroyed my last sanctuary, then I would have in the next turn. So that's pretty exciting and very tight. So that feels really well done. And also, unlike in Magic the Gathering, you can just play cards and attack your opponent, or your opponent then decides with which units to block or whatever, and then play some spells. You have 4 lanes, 4 sanctuaries, and each sanctuary can have 1 defender and 1 attacker that will defend the sanctuary across from you. So you can't just attack any sanctuary. You have lanes that you need to adhere to. So that makes the game very strategic, almost like an abstract strategy where you place a unit in a certain spot and that's where it will do its thing. So placement is very important here, and except for with the Thanon, who can move around, the other decks, you really need to think about, where am I going to put this unit? Am I going to play this acolyte here in attack position or in defense position? Where will I use my champion? Because once you've destroyed the opponent's sanctuary in that lane, your champion there will probably be useless if you use them to attack. And if he's used in defense, then he will stay there until he's gone, and then your opponent can attack that sanctuary. But you really have to think that through. And in some decks, you can actually sacrifice your units afterwards, but you can always replace a unit. You'll just have to discard it and play a new card in that spot if you really need to, but that rarely happens. And because of all that, it plays very fast. So your first couple of games will probably take about 45 minutes to an hour because you're still reading all the cards and figuring out what it does, and taking your turns out loud. I like to do that so my opponent also kind of learns what my faction does. And you need to know what all the cards do, so I would advise, your first turn, just read the cards, just tell your opponent what you're doing, and after a couple of games, you'll get it. It will click, and then you'll play a lot faster. You just say, okay, I'm gonna play this card here and this card there. So you have, your the start of your round. You get your crystals, then you have the summoning phase where you play your cards and do some rituals, and then you have your attack phase, and your unexhausted cards can attack, and then at the end you just put all your cards back up straight again, and your sanctuaries gain splendor if they still can, and you resolve the end of game effects, and that's it. And that can happen in just a couple of minutes, and you're done, and then the next player will play. And so then after a couple of games, your game will last about 15 to 20, maybe 30 minutes tops. So I think it's a very fast and action-packed, tight card game. And I also found that the replayability, because of that fact, is very high. Like I said, after one game, you're gonna want to play again, especially if you lost with a certain faction that you played for the first time. You're gonna want to play again and see if you can change up your strategy and just play your cards differently and see if you can win then. And if you have a certain opponent with a certain tactic as well, you're going to want to counter that tactic. So it's a lot of fun figuring out how to do that with each of these factions. So if you got the hang of it, and a game lasts like 15 minutes, you really want to go and play again to get a rematch or best out of 3. So to me, this is a lot of fun. I've played this a lot during lunch breaks with colleagues, and you can just bring it along or just pick a couple of decks. You don't even have to bring all of them. You can just take 2 or 3 decks and then maybe just blindly draft one of them and just go ahead and play a quick game. So that's a lot of fun as well. And what's also really cool is that you can actually deck build your own deck from all of these 6 factions. You simply pick, for example, 2 factions that you like and have different strategies that you want to combine, and then you take unique cards from each deck and put them into your new deck, again consisting of 4 sanctuaries, 1 champion. You can only have 1 champion, and the rest needs to be rituals and acolytes, and 1 of each. So you can't have double acolytes in a constructed deck, at least in these rules that I had. So that's also pretty cool. If you found 2 decks to have really cool strategies and you want to try and combine them, you can totally do that. You could even throw together cards from all 6 factions. But like in Magic the Gathering as well, I think you might want to try and limit yourself to 2 factions to start out with. Maybe a couple of cards from a third if you're feeling confident about that. But that is also a very cool extra feature that this game offers. Plus, it can also be played solo, which is a big plus for a lot of people. So the game also comes with an extra set of cards. So each of these boxes has 5 solo play cards. So the deluxe box, which has all the factions, has 10. And these cards have, then this is just prototype, the art isn't finished yet, but they have a certain description on them, and they're usually more powerful enemies, and they will tell you to put tokens on them, which was why we got these small tokens with attribute symbols on them as well. And you'll have to battle them. I didn't find the solo rules in the preliminary rule book yet, but it seems to me that you're just basically playing as usual, but with an AI, and that seems to me to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to try that out as well. But it's a good thing that there is an optional solo mode. The only downside I find is that it is, of course, very language dependent. So despite all the symbols and all the attributes and lots of things you can just basically make out from the symbols, I mean, each card has a summoning cost, and they have their faction symbol, they have their attack value, their defense value, these attribute symbols. But most of the cards, this one doesn't, but the other cards have some extra text, so an ability. And the sanctuaries also have abilities. And those are, of course, in English, so you will have to have a good grasp of the English language in order to be able to play this game. So that's the only thing, the only negative really I could find. Otherwise, I had a lot of fun with this. So in conclusion, I found this game highly enjoyable. It's fast, it's fun, it's very strategic, it's asymmetrical, it has great illustrations, nice components, and in the final version you'll also have that nice collector's edition box that stores everything and has play mats and wooden tokens instead of these small cardboard tokens that you have here. So that's an improvement as well. So I'm definitely giving this a huge thumbs up. And if that appeals to you, go check out the Kickstarter by clicking the link in the description below or the I in the corner of this video, and you can check that out. And each of these boxes with 3 factions each is about 12 euros, and the collector's box is 38. So for just a little extra, you'll have both of these boxes with all 6 factions, with 2 play mats, with wooden tokens, all the crystals, and all the solo mode cards as well. So I'd check that out if I were you. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my review. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon to get a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.